It was actually originally a British. I can't talk today
I
either.
know it's like
It's
A
okay.
British fortification
Mhm.
because of the threat of Napoleon at the time.
Okay, right.
Oh, I see. That makes sense.
And it was built to protect the Cork Harbor should Napoleon's forces have his naval forces have come into
Okay.
Ireland and tried to attack.
Which is kind of funny when you think about it. And I'm only going to say this because, you know, I mean, Britain's kind of hold on Ireland is North Ireland, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this is not Northern Ireland.
No.
So I find it kind of interesting that, you know, they've decided they're going to put, and they'd be worried about Napoleon, you know. I mean,
of course, at that time, the British Navy was the largest navy in the world, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So it makes some sense to have some people stationed because I guess, you know, it's in that kind of prime location there because you're off the coast of both Scotland and Wales and England along that side. So to have numerous fortifications through there, if Napoleon decided to come up around Scotland the other way, just to be tricky, or, you know, the long way around.
Yes.
Right? But yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense, but it's interesting that it was like a British fortification, but, you know, at a time when it was clearly, you know, not in the British area of, you know, that they took from Ireland. So I find that interesting. But again, too, it's like the energy for me would be the sort of the telltale. To walk the grounds and be able to, you know, just absorb that and figure out, you know, what areas were what and what was going on where. And I wonder, too, would the sort of ominous, overbearing energy of a military space and a prison, you know, sort of wash away the perhaps monastic energy, if you like, that may have been there. I mean, that might be something. And I guess it would be, you know, how you pick up on things, right? Like, you know, what would you pick up on in that location? So let's talk about some of the ghosts that people talk about when they're there.
Yes.
There's a lot. Like said, a lot of the shows have gone there to do investigations, like overnight investigations. So Ian, is there anything that sort of jumps out at you when you were looking at this initially and thinking about the hauntings and, you know, sort of what kind of leapt out at you?
Well, I actually could not find any specific hauntings regarding the location, but to come back to the original question as to why it may be haunted or why it is haunted is, as we say, you know, the whole prison system is, you know, was just hell on earth for these men and women and children that were there. And I've actually got a little bit of writing here from CNN News.
Oh, okay.
And that's exactly what they called the article, was Hell on Earth.
Wow.
And just to kind of break into it here, it says by 1853, the number of prisoners on the island had risen to 2,500, making it possibly the biggest prison in the British Empire at the time, if not more, in terms of the number of prisoners. Up to 40 prisoners were sardined in each dormitory-style room that measured 40 feet by 18 feet.
I read that. I was like, that's just crazy. Imagine all those people crammed into that one spot.
Terrible. It's so inhumane, isn't it? So inhumane. And I think, you know, as we tend to pick up on that. I think, you know, with people who are sensitive to that type of energy. There are some lingering spirits that in history, the Spike Island. For example, I guess in 1980s, members of Ireland's Navy who were stationed on the island reported seeing dark figures standing over their bunks. And during a recent paranormal investigation, the inn's manager apparently said that there was a lot of tension in cells where violent prison riots took place in 1985. Which they believe was left from the British occupation, as you mentioned. And they said that other tourists have seen a soldier dressed in an old-fashioned uniform sitting right in front of a fireplace. And I guess they do overnight tours. I guess they, in 2018, a visitor on a Halloween ghost tour snapped a photo with what appears to be an apparition of a man standing in one of the long corridors. So there's definitely a lot going on there. Another one I'd just like to mention was because there's a lot of talk about the conditions in the prison being bad. Some of the conditions were that I guess the prisoners were like tied to walls by the neck, and there was a lot of hard labor. So prisoners typically died on Spike Island due to malnourishment and hard labor and torture and suicide. And part of that hard labor is the building the star-shaped fort, which if you look from above, if you look it up, you can see the star shape of the fort.
Right. Yeah.
But conditions in the prison worsened with the construction of the punishment block, which was in 1860, which was built after 3 prisoners murdered one of the guards. And this cell block is the most violent prisoners. That's what it was for, the most violent prisoners. So, and inmates were sent there to be chained to the walls by their necks, and their heads were covered by a black hood. And apparently it's been reported that paranormal investigators have captured electronic voice phenomena that taunt and mock them when they spend time in the punishment block.
Right. Yeah. And that's just, there's some really, really interesting other very specific spirits mentioned too. Ian, did you come across any of those ones? I'll talk about some, but
but there's also to continue with what Rachel was just saying about how the conditions were so bad in the prison,
right?
That a lot of prisoners did not survive their incarceration, and there are actually 2 graveyards
on the site.
That, according to records, hold upwards of 1,000 bodies of prisoners that had died during their time that they were at Spike Island.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's really, like I said, it's had so many different permeations of purpose that it's, I mean, of course, prisons, people are always going to die in prison conditions, right? I mean, they were certainly terrible. And
but you look at the numbers, and 1,000 bodies.
Yeah.
Well, that's almost half of the prison population of 2,500.
It is.
Yeah.
That were there.
And also I found a tweet of someone, I don't know who this is, Louise Bunyan. It says, so went on the Spike Island Cork After Dark tour tonight, didn't know what to expect, and took this picture of an empty corridor in a prison building. The facial recognition circle came on even though there was no one there. What do you see? And they're talking about spooky Halloween, and there's some pictures that we'll have to look at in our own time. There seems to be like a shadowy figure at the end of the corridor the whole way. I think we typically saw that. Eastern State Penitentiary. I think we saw that there too. Seems to be a common thing. I don't know why.
Does, and and that's something interesting too. I just want to note, because Spike Island is it's only 104 square acres, so that's actually very small in terms of it sounds like it's a lot, but that's like a really small area for all of the things. It actually says it's 103 acres in Cork Harbor, so it's not a big island, really. 100 acres isn't huge. And so, like you said, Ian, if you've got half of your prison population, buried, that's a lot of burials, even just in 100 acres.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a lot of varying stories for such a small area.
Oh, yeah. Apparently the prison was home to several notorious Irish prisoners as well. And they were like the equivalent of, they were basically the Irish Al Capone.
Right, yes.
Cahill, Martin Cahill, which was a Dublin gangster, served time there at Spike Island for the only crime that they could prove he committed, breaching the peace. But he was believed to have a slew of robberies and art heists under his belt. Cahill earned the reputation as an Irish Al Capone. I love that.
Cahill, I think his name was. But yeah, and that's kind of the interesting thing, right? It's one of those weird situations where there's just because it spans such a huge amount of history, as I said. We have such a different and varied kind of energy going on at this place. And so I find it very interesting in terms of all of the different things that are going on and what is happening and what we could feel if we were there to visit. Right. So I'm going to see if I can, I'm going to see if I can change my background picture. So just bear with me. Feel free to talk about some more ghosts while if I can do that, because I want people to be able to see the background, like what Spike Island looks like.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to see.
Oh, yeah. And if I would love to share the pictures with you as well from Louise Bunyan on the with the shadowy figure at the end of the hallway. It looks like it looks like you can see 2 feet planted on the ground. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, I'd like to send that to you so you can check it out.
I'm just looking for a picture to see if we can get one that shows the whole island, right? So I think I found one. So while we're doing that, I do want to mention there's a number of other ghosts that were very particularly mentioned in terms of Spike Island. And one of them was actually one that would seem kind of unusual, but given the history. So there's 2 that I came across, well, 3 actually, but one is a female apparition, and they say she's, dressed in white. That seems to be, as we've talked about this before, labeling apparitions by colors, the brown
lady in white,
the gray lady,
the lady in black, the lady in red.
Yes. So this one again is labeled as such. There's also apparently the spirit of John Mitchell, who was a prisoner at the jail, and he often will just sort of appear as a white mist. And then there's the one of the soldier, but this one apparently has 2 black holes where his eyes should be. So that would be an interesting one to come across. And another one is, the story is actually over 100 years old. So it's not even a modern story in terms of our time, but they say there's a little girl named Eileen who lived on the island with her family. Her father was part of the military there. And one day she saw, as she was walking across the island, a troubling sight looking at her over the wall. So it appeared to be a human, very tall and sort of grisly and slimy. She sort of explained it as being rather terrifying. And so she stumbled and she fell. She picked herself up and she staggered to the nearby cottage, where she told them that she had just seen this sort of scary looking person. And that was something that the soldiers of the Irish Army apparently also saw, and some even fired at this apparition.